I'm going to introduce you to a concept of your job to be done, which then will bring me into, okay, what the actual job is, and that's the journey to hybrid multi-cloud. And then what are the challenges within this journey? And finally, how IBM addresses and approaches these challenges, and what do we do with our customers. So this picture is one of my favorites when I first got introduced to it. And this is from a famous economist in the 1960s. His name was Theodore Levitt. And he mentioned that people do not want a quarter-inch drill. They want a quarter-inch hole. And if you think about that, we live in a disruptive area at the moment. And that's why the companies like Uber started thinking about the hole, not the drill. And then they came up with a platform, and they became the biggest taxi company in the world without owning a single car. At IBM, our approach is the same: to think about the hole that the customer needs to drill and find out how we can help them in doing so. So what is that hole? That hole is the cloud journey. It started when we only had private cloud. That was traditionally a server on the premise of the company, and all the applications and everything else was being run on that server. And God forbid, if you had a shortage in electricity, or if you had a cut in everything, then all of your system would stop. Then public cloud was introduced. Within public cloud, it was introduced to some large organization, and that went on to be a foundation of hybrid cloud, which companies had a combination of their own internal server as well as some a cloud service. But where we are right now today is this concept of hybrid multi-cloud. Hybrid, I think you all know, that means a combination of private and public. But within the public cloud, we have so many different cloud service providers at the moment. Think about a standard organization. They would have their own on-premise service to manage and run the sensitive data. At the same time, let's say for email services, they have Office 365, which is a cloud service. For the CRM, let's say they have, I don't know, think about a CRM provider, Salesforce, SAP, for the ERP, and so on. They would have all of these different cloud environments. So knowing this, then the challenge is, how do you manage, how do you come up with a strategy in addressing this current enterprise architecture and this current infrastructure? And the latest research show that by far the biggest challenge of any organization that handles large data is developing a public or private multi-cloud strategy. At the same time, the top priorities of executives are mainly three things. First, of course, is the integrity of your data, is the security. How secure is your data? I don't know how many of you were involved in or heard the news. It wasn't too long ago that Toll Australia had the whole system down. They literally shut the whole system down because they had cyber attacks, and they were now manually delivering parcels. I was affected because I was waiting for an online order that was promised to me it'll get there in time. So anyway, so security is number one. Number two is innovation. We're moving with such a fast speed in terms of innovation in the market and in the industry that the biggest thing that keeps the CXOs up is how can they innovate to keep up with all of these challenges and with all of these new technologies. But all of these are around one single important thing, and that's customers. We all do all of these things because we want to increase our customer satisfaction, which in turn means our business is growing, which in turn means the business is earning money, and hence you and I can wake up every morning and go to work. So knowing these challenges, let's see what the journey to hybrid cloud and hybrid multi-cloud involves. It involves 4 stages. The first one is to migrate. So what is migration? Basically, any application that can support this infrastructure would be just simply lift and shift. You bring it into the cloud. Once you do that, then you realize some of your application will not support that, and therefore you need to also modernize. So you start switching the code of some of your application to modernize to make sure that they now support this new environment. Bless you. The third one is innovate. Of course, innovation means from now on, you need to start thinking about how you write new applications that support this hybrid multi-cloud environment, that are vendor agnostic. Let's say right now you're at AWS, but you decide to make the wise decision to move to IBM Cloud. And so once you do that, do your applications actually support this vendor agnostic platform that without any tweaking, you can just move your applications around. And now, the biggest challenge, in my personal humble opinion, is managing it. That's where I think most IT people are struggling, that within an organization, within the enterprise architecture, you've got all of these different environments, these silos, which you will see later on in the slides. And within these silos, how do you manage? How do you make sure that everything communicates with each other? How do you make sure that the data is easily accessible to you? So management of this infrastructure is a challenge. So it is inevitable. It will happen. Your organization is either in one of those 4 stages, or it's transitioning from one to another. But how you think about your storage is very important. And let me tell you why. Because in 2017, it was known that data now is the most valuable resource in the world. I don't know how many of you followed the US elections and what the role Facebook played in there. And that's why some of the strongest companies, some of the most powerful companies in the world are the companies that have data and large amount of it, especially on us ordinary people. And therefore, data plays a massive role, and that's why the way you think about your storage is extremely important. Why? Because within this lift and shift and move environment, you're dealing with containers and containerized application and Kubernetes and Dockers and all of these things. And you need to think about a storage that can support not only your current infrastructure, but also can communicate and provide you and your application access to the data within the hybrid multi-cloud environment. At the moment, the biggest challenge is the infrastructure is tied into the brand. So if you have a specific brand of storage, that storage only is linked in to or linked to that specific vendor. And communicating between them is challenging, and that's why you have different silos within the organization. But think for a minute, what if? What if you could have your whole storage as a software platform that would virtualize all of your storage without considering who is the actual vendor? Think of it as like a software foundation, software as a service, that regardless of who you decide to purchase the actual hardware of storage from, you would have full visibility and access to any type of storage that you would have. You could smartly decide how you store data, to what level of storage, whether you have tape storage that you want to just use it as a backup solution for the data that you don't usually use, or you have flash storage, or you have NVMe storage. And that's where IBM comes in. What we can do, and that's how we address the challenge of our customers, is we can provide you with a software foundation that is agile, that bridges your current infrastructure to the previous one and to the future one. It's cloud enabled, so it is designed in a way that will be compatible for your future needs. It helps you within your data reduction to ensure that you have an optimized amount of storage and how your applications are run. And most importantly, it provides you with the security and encryption that your data deserves. So the IBM difference is, first, we provide you with that platform that is hybrid. It supports both your private and public infrastructure. It supports multi-cloud regardless of the vendors. It is open. Some of you might have heard with our very small value acquisition of $35 billion, almost $35 billion of Red Hat, which provides us with that open platform. And it is secure. Again, IBM is soon to be 109-year-old company. Within the Gartner, we are on the top of the 4 quadrants in terms of the security. And today we have a fantastic panel organized for you with some very good expert keynote speakers on this panel that will be talking to you about security. And it is managed. Why it's important? Because within this whole infrastructure, as I said, the biggest challenge for IT professionals is how you manage all of these different environments and get rid of these silos so that things communicate with each other. So with IBM, we have AI-enabled technologies. Watson is just one of them that can help you analyze your storage, for example, to find out about an upcoming challenge that you're going to face very soon. But our platform will actually warn you ahead of time. So I said all of this to go back to this favorite slide of mine, that our focus is on your job to be done and our customer's job to be done, because we try to find out what your challenges are and try to address them for you. That is it for my presentation. If you would like any further information about any of our actual solution, feel free to connect to me. I'm on LinkedIn. My contact details are over there, and I'll be glad to help you out within your journey to hybrid multi-cloud. I now hand it to my esteemed colleague, Damon, who is ANZ IBM Australia, New Zealand technical manager, who is graciously accepted to present here. Thank you, Damon.
Thanks, Kaveh.
Cheers.
Thank you, everyone, for still being awake. And I've been watching from the back. I haven't been judging or scoring everyone, but you're looking all well attended, so that's sensational. And I'll also do my best not to put anyone to sleep. That would be a very terrible thing. I'm talking about software-defined storage. And I'm going to start from the basics here by talking about a bridge. I must admit, as an icon, the bridge is pretty well known, right? I've been around the world doing presentations, and I see the Golden Gate Bridge being used a lot. But in different places in North America, people actually don't recognise the Golden Gate Bridge. They think it's a local bridge, and they call it, the John Smith Memorial Bridge, down the road. It looks just like that when the fog comes in. And people from California are actually amazed that people don't recognise their iconic bridge. People recognise the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now, why am I talking about a bridge? Well, first of all, I'll just introduce my role and who I am. So Kaveh introduced me as Damon Wynne. I'm the client technical manager for the storage group in the ANZ region. And what that means is basically I look after a really talented team of guys who come from an engineering background. They know how to build big data platforms. They know how to scope and size appropriately for these platforms and for the requirements that they need to deliver. And it's with that in mind that I'm thinking of this bridge, because when we consider when it was built, the Sydney Harbour Bridge was the singular largest engineering project on the planet. It's pretty big news. In fact, the people responsible for building it were exceeding what we knew about engineering for that sort of span at the time. And forget the science, the mathematics, the learning at that time, their peers thought they were crazy. In fact, they literally said, "You are mad. it won't work, you'll kill people, it will collapse after the first 3-4 days of operation. Now, it lends me to another part of why that bridge is really important this morning. I'm based in Adelaide. It's a small country town in Australia. And whilst I did have the privilege of sitting next to a very lovely Irish lady, and she proudly informed me as I sat down in my seat that she'd already wiped everything so I wouldn't catch the coronavirus from anyone. It doesn't actually help with the story I want to tell. So we're going to transform this Irish woman into a loud, obnoxious Texas oil engineer. Why is that important? Because when we took off, he was complaining about how small Adelaide was. And you just ask anyone from South Australia, we just proudly tell you it's pretty small. Because when you go over there, it's actually quite big. But it's the biggest building in Adelaide is about 33 stories high. So give you some scope there. Half the size of anything that's basically in the horizon here. So this Texan / was Irish woman, he was complaining about everything he saw. And whilst he was, telling some interesting stories about what he did in Texas, about his massive projects he was involved in, I didn't realise how obnoxious he was until he offered to share the Uber with me. And I thought, well, we live in an age where we need to save resources. So I said, yeah, sure, we'll share the Uber. But he leant over and he said to the Uber driver, look, I've never been to Sydney before. Can you show me around the city? I want to see what you Australians are capable of. I'm not even trying the American accent here, right? Now, the Uber driver said, well, sure, what do you want to do? He goes, well, just take me to a couple of landmarks. And I said, look, I'll show you two. And he drove to the Sydney Opera House. So we swung around from the airport and he actually parked the car. And he said, to really see it in its full glory, you need to get out and have a look. And so we got out and we had a look, and the Texan said, oh yeah, no, it's not that big. How long did it take to build? How many people were involved? Now, this is when the Uber driver magically became Wikipedia and said it took 1,000 days to build, it took 200 dedicated engineers, and there you have it. After that, nearly 4 years of building the Sydney Opera House. The Texan said, in Texas, we would have done that in a week with half the men. We built big in Texas. The Uber driver goes, well, he's considering what his next fare is going to be. He's looking at the time and he goes, all right, let's wrap this up. Walks around and says, what about that thing? And the Texan says, that thing, the bridge, oh, it's magnificent. What is it? The Uber driver says, I don't know, wasn't here this morning. So why are we talking about the bridge again? I like a chuckle. So we said, largest engineering project on the planet. It was built during the Great Depression. So considering the investment in this, when everyone said the person who designed it was crazy, everyone involved in it was crazy, there were, unfortunately, people's lives were lost building it, but they were dedicated to doing it because they knew not only would it just be a landmark, but it would serve a purpose that would bring great value to the city of Sydney. It was designed when the entire count of vehicles in Sydney was just over 30,000, okay? And if you look at what's required today, it's this cycle of continued maintenance. Now, the maintenance cost each year is around $5 million. The original cost to build the Sydney Harbour Bridge, what I hazard a guess, if we transfer it to today's value, $15 million. So every 3 years, maintaining the icon of Sydney Harbour costs what the original construction costs of the building, of the bridge in the first place. Now, we're talking about the bridge because when we're building platforms for data, we need to take some considerations in that look beyond just our immediate requirements. Because the Sydney Harbour Bridge today has daily over 150,000 cars travelling over it. Do you think when they originally designed that bridge that would ever be something they would conceive of? Well, no. Otherwise, it would have had another 10 lanes on either side and maybe made it a triple stack. And they certainly would have built it out of maybe materials that wouldn't have cost the cost of the bridge every 3 years to rebuild. So if they had the right data at hand, do you think they would have built it the same way? No. And why didn't they have the data at hand? Well, one, it's the first time that anyone had done this. That's why everyone thought they were crazy. Well, we're not crazy now, but we learn from these sort of things and we go, okay, we're building a foundation. We're not building a bridge, but we're building platforms, we're building environments, we're building systems where we need to consider things like cost, the support, the maintenance, the repainting of $5 million each year. We want to consider what the outcomes are. Are we really building a platform that's appropriate? Your question about AWS, for example, is a great one. A lot of people adopt AWS, and there's nothing wrong with that as a platform. You can execute workloads and so forth. But what if you want to get out of that silo and execute data from somewhere else? Very difficult, because they don't want you to go somewhere else. Why? Because that's money they lose. And it's sort of like going to, anyone been to a casino in the States, for example, a big, massive casino? No? You're all very good people. I have been tortured at times with going to international events where they have them in casinos, and I don't gamble. I do like watching people gamble because it's like a comedy to me, the tragedy to comedy, the win to the loss, the crying, the laughter, the arrests. And when we talk about the casinos, they're designed deliberately to change as you're in there. The entrances are obscured. So you go in there in the morning, and that would be when I would go, because I'm walking through there for a conference. You're walking out, you go to the same entrance, and you go, there's a wall here now. And it's not because you're mad. They actually move the structure around inside the casino. Why? They want to keep you in there. AWS wants to keep you in there. They will move things around so that you can't get out. And eventually you will find your way out, but you'll leave that data in that part there and you'll start executing over there. And now what you start dealing with is 2 copies of the same data being executed on different platforms, because one platform gives you what you need and the other doesn't. So that's the outcomes that we need to consider. We also need to consider the expectations. What are we building for in the future? Are we building a Sydney Harbour Bridge that's going to be able to traverse 300,000 cars per day or 1 million cars per day? Are we looking at the data and going, okay, what can we extrapolate? What insights can we get that tells us that this is going to be an appropriate platform to build from? Does everyone know what data is? No, I'm not going to make anyone stand out there. Does everyone know what this is, though? Pretty much considered the first smartphone. All right, we're not going to mention the iPhone 2. iPhone 3. What was so special about this? Had 8 gig of capacity, maybe 16 gig, depending on the model you bought. Had a whopping 2 megapixel camera and a 3 and a bit inch screen. Boy, it was a fantastic device when it came out. 2008. Now, the iPhone 11. Who's got an iPhone 11 here, by the way? I'm seeing lots of cameras being pointed at me, phones. What's interesting about this is that this is, over a decade of development and capability chucked into here. Now, when you're buying a phone, what's the first thing you look at? The camera. Yeah, the specs. Yep, camera, how much memory it's got, the price, how fast it is. Yep. Why isn't anyone saying, I want to make phone calls? What is it? It's a phone. So, yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. We're using the apps on there now. Yeah, that's right. So, and this is a consumer device, but it's driving massive data generation in its very simplest form because we like the camera on it. And what's the first thing we did when we had this 3G phone? We took photos of everyone. And we discovered this wonderful thing where we could do this. And I'm going to do it because I like doing selfies with crowds. Sometimes it fails miserably. Like I get a photo of you guys instead of me, and that's boring. No. It's very exciting. So I'm sorry. I can sort of get a bit of a widescreen in here, but sorry guys, unless you want to run over here. All right, just everyone put up their hands and say, "Big data." Oh, Michael, you blinked. Oh, yep, you definitely blinked. All right, so what I'm going to do with this photo when I get my new phone? What's the first thing I do? Yep, I share it. And after a while, it's great because that phone is doing wonderful things for me. I can show off to my friends. It's fast. But fast forward 2 years' time, what happens? Oh, why is this so slow? I saw my mate's phone. Look at that, 5 megapixel picture. I want his phone. I want the new phone after his. So you've got the new phone. You've got your new, you waited so long, you waited till you got the 11. And what's the first thing you did then from your old phone to your new phone? Yeah. Why? You don't want to lose it, the data, right? So that data is important to you. When was the last time you looked at the photos on there? Nah, you don't look at them. You might look for a photo, but you recognise that the whole thing on that phone is important to you. That data is valuable, maybe not right now, but in the future. Yeah, all right, A plus everyone. Boom. They're better than the IBM sales guys, aren't they? Yeah. Shh, they're watching us right now. All right, I've got a better slide than your one with the dodgy oil rigs, by the way. Yeah. The world's most valuable resource is no longer oil. Look, we're only harping on this because it is. Another analogy here. If you've got a friend who's crawled out the desert and he falls unconscious at your feet and he's written on a note with a hard drive or a USB thumb drive on there and it says, on this drive is the location to the world's largest deposit of oil or gold or whatever that's valuable, right? A tangible resource. And you look at this, go through the contents, and it's filled with stacks of information, but you have no idea where this gold is, okay? So when we talk about realising and harnessing the value of data, being valuable like oil or the next commodity like oil, this is because we know that things like artificial intelligence can harness that data to give us value from it. So we can take that thumb drive, where the location of where that gold mine is amongst all of that data that's sat on there, and we use a platform to basically mine it and give us that. So when we think about the value of what's on that drive, the drive itself isn't valuable. The data is incredibly valuable. Your photos on your phone are very valuable to you, but everyone has a different point of reference of what that value means. So when we say data is the new oil, it's really just understanding that if you go through it and we find it, then we're going to get value from it. The challenge is here though, as we can see, is that when you upgrade from your 3G phone to your 11S, 2 megapixel camera to a 12 megapixel camera, significantly larger amounts of data. So you go and buy your 120 gig or 256 gig, whatever Apple likes to lock you into, and you might have started here today, but with your new camera, you're filling that up really quickly. But when you started, it's pretty much full from all your other stuff that you put on there. But we're keeping this data because we don't know when we're going to realise the value from it. And so we now start thinking about, okay, maybe I don't buy the next iPhone. Maybe I buy a data platform that takes photos. And the reason why is because we're effectively tripling our data almost on a yearly to year-on-year basis, effectively. I put this on an automatic slide because Kaveh said I had to hurry up. But if I go back to here, the second challenge then that we have ahead of us is how do we actually find in amongst all that data in an appropriate fashion? How do we classify, how do we structure that data so that we can actually use it? And how do we make that data accessible once we find it useful so that people like yourselves can actually harness the value of that data, be it via applications you develop, platforms that you plug in and interconnect. You're talking about just being able to We don't use the phone anymore because why? We've got so many different ways we can interconnect. And each one of these generates what? More data. More data engenders more data. And then we look at this at the top here. Who's responsible for managing this? Data scientists. The number one hot role for the last 2 or 3 years now. I'm sorry, Professor Michael, I did do some research on yourself and some of the projects you're involved in, right? Internet of Things, the number one generator of data on the planet. Do we use it? If you're smart, you do. And this is one of the things about Macquarie University. The research projects that they work on are engendering the value of those points of data for industry, actually making it useful for them. And the first thing we do is actually show people what data actually means and why it's valuable, hence spending half of our discussion on an iPhone and a bridge. And then you get really complicated. Right, this is where all the data comes from, where it interconnects. Applications, records management systems, warehouses, individual consumer level client information, internal applications, so our interconnectivity with apps that we put on our phones, data that generates to the people who own those apps is very valuable, which is why we, in the main, get to use them for free, because we're effectively the farm for that data. And that's why we have Facebook and Google are essentially, they're just data management companies. They take your data that you don't think is valuable, and they know it's really valuable. It's the biggest scam in the last decade, really. Because half the time we complain about how slow the apps work, but we still use them anyway. They crash, we share all this information that we shouldn't be sharing. We complain when someone uses that information against us, but we quite happily give it up, don't we? So that then goes to talk about another part of the discussion where we go, we have multiple copies of the data. The data's separated because we put in different silos. One's in AWS, one's on Google Cloud, one's on Microsoft Azure. Because there's multiple copies of it, we're doubling or tripling the cost of just storing it there because, again, we know it's valuable, but we don't know when we're going to realise the value. And because they're all separated, they're all bespoke. They're not in real time. We've just stepped away from our intercommunication between apps to separating it and saying, well, actually, you don't have the same app as me anymore. You don't have Apple's instant messaging because I've got Samsung's version of it, real-time communication. Yeah, I mean, just because Samsung built it on an open platform and Apple did a closed one. And that's an important discussion because unless it's open, the data is housed in a silo. It's caged in there. And because these workloads that we're talking about here rarely operate in isolation, you don't just take a records management system and have it run by itself, and that's the whole point of running it. It needs like an authentication system. It needs to know who the person is accessing it, for example. Your core application that you could be working on could be about something that's really life-changing. Maybe it's about curing cancer. But unless you can publish that information so people can access it, then what's the point? So nothing works in isolation anymore. So if we build these on open platforms, not only are we simplifying things, reducing costs, and sure, you can have your copies of data where you want, but maybe they don't have to be copies. Maybe they can just be all linked. And so IBM spent a lot of time thinking about the foundation of data. And effectively, because data keeps on growing, you have to build it at scale. But you can't deliver something to someone at scale. You might not need, for example, a Sydney Harbour Bridge today. You might just need a pedestrian bridge. But the key thing here is that if you want to expand that, you shouldn't have to be able to tear it down so you start again or lock it away and build another bridge next to it. So the key thing with what we do is we make the process of automatically sharing and distributing that data as simple as possible. And we do this by means of unifying where the data comes from as a single point of truth. And that can be across multiple different platforms itself. So it can be on an AWS, it can be on a Google, it can be on an IBM cloud, it can be where you want it to be, but we link it together in what we basically signify as a single namespace. And we then now have a platform where we can start working on the quality of that data. start classifying it. Which is the better photo? Was it the 2 megapixel version of me taking a picture of us here in the crowd today? Or was it the 15 megapixel one, you know? Well, maybe I want the 2 megapixel one because I'm not having a good hair day. I'm not sure. But if you look again at what Macquarie is doing, their value is about really focusing on what data is valuable so that industry and organisations can actually harness the value from it. So the value that we see here is being represented worldwide by our actual projects that we work on as well. So we look here, supercomputers. Who's excited by that sort of stuff? Please someone put up their hand. Yay! So the world's 2 most powerful supercomputers run on spectrum scale storage platforms. Why? Because that's the only platform that they could ingest the data quick enough in order to be of some value. The fact that it's also built on IBM server and compute platforms is a nice way of bringing it all together. And it's significantly more powerful than any other platform on the earth. And will likely be so. They just released the new ladder. But Summit and Sierra, those 2 supercomputers, the amount of data that they're able of processing in a second staggers what the mind really is. We're talking terabytes upon terabytes per second. It's only possible if you almost democratize where the storage sits on from a hardware perspective, and you put a software-defined platform in between that to make it all happen. And that's what spectrum scale is. So when we talk about building a bridge, we can't build a bridge out of software, but we can build our data environments out of software. And when we do that, our foundation isn't tied to a hardware platform per se. It can lift and shift almost at will with your data to allow your data to be accessible across multiple physical platforms. And that's the real distinguishing piece here. All of this performance, yes, it's dependent on hardware platforms, but it's only possible if the software enables it to be moved and shifted and managed and classified so that data that you're using and ingesting is actually useful to you. Then you put all the server components on there to get it done as quickly as possible. I'll skip past these because I think I've got about 1 minute, have I there, Kaveh? Yeah. So I spoke just then about the software. Yes, we have some hardware appliances that make that happen. Mostly because, as Kaveh mentioned in his discussion, again, IBM decided to build open platforms. And so we consider these as appliances that are made smart by the software. But the next piece in that journey is how do we incorporate those across other platforms like cloud services? And the key thing there is that as long as you can control or manage the workflow of that data going across from a single source, it really doesn't matter how many of those platforms you have, because that software is what manages your copy, your scale, your performance. If I look at here at that data management piece, we talked about private cloud with Kaveh, that first instance, very easy to manage your own environment. Became very difficult when you had growth. So if you can have seamless growth with a single management process, that's significantly a cost saving. But then when it scales to massive amounts of data, big data and analytic workloads, there are not many platforms that can actually do this. So it's significant when you look at the most powerful supercomputers in the world use this as a platform. Nothing else is even considered. And why? Because in the end, we're trying to get the value out of our data, all right? Artificial intelligence, deep learning, machine learning is only valuable if the data isn't restricted. If it's performance restriction, if it's location restriction, if it's platform restriction, it's a restriction. We've just built a Sydney Harbour bridge with only 4 lanes, and now we're paying $5 million a year to maintain it, and it still doesn't give us what we want. So we look at those use cases, well, that's your future, everyone. It started years ago, but you're looking at the fruition of what the future is going to be. This is the execution where we're looking at real insights to the data that you're seeing, beyond just facial recognition of your photo on your phone. Now, because we've democratized cloud with a software-defined environment, that makes using your platform selection almost not to be the consideration you need anymore, okay? It's about choosing your software-defined platform that's important. Everything else is just then the scale that you build it to. So my angry Texan that was really an Irish woman, I don't think he cared too much about the bridge that was built in a day, but I think you guys should. Because the one thing about cloud and the platforms that are out there in the market, the one thing that's completely different to building your own infrastructure is that it can be built in a day. And therein lies one of the biggest traps on the planet, because just because it can be built in a day doesn't mean it can't fall over in a day as well. So build your foundation appropriately. Choose your platforms based on their ability to be open. So you're not building data silos and restricting yourselves. If every single device that you interact with today is generating data, and that data is valuable, and you're going to be the ones who harness the value of that data for the future, be it as individuals or as members of an organisation, you need to understand that your foundation needs to be open as well. And that's the only platform on the planet that's open like that. So thank you for your attentiveness.